Very good afternoon to all of you. I am Sunil Kumar, Director, Central Water Commission, which is an apex technical organization under Ministry of Jal Shakti, Bharat Sarkar. Everybody knows that water is a very complex and at the same time very fascinating resources. It is multidisciplinary and it is multi-stakeholder resources. It is connected to every human being, living and non-living being as well. But we are going to discuss today its nexus, water nexus with energy and food. You know, water is needed to generate energy and energy is needed to supply water. This is water and energy nexus. Water is needed to grow food and food transports water, that is virtual water, that is water and food nexus. And energy is needed to produce food and food can be used to produce energy, that is energy and food nexus. So I'd like to put one simple question to both the panelists, how this concept of water, energy, food nexus guide in integrated resource planning and decision making. So may I invite first Mr. Rohtash Mal, please.
Thank you, Sunil. A complex question, but I think some outlines available. One insight, agriculture or plants don't need water, they need moisture. And therefore, the uncontrolled use of water itself is a subject for discussion. The controlled use of water results in moisture at the root level of the plants, allows the roots to breathe and grow faster, the first thing. Second, water is transformed into residue. You need the least amount of water for the highest amount of plants to be created. Please remember that 80 to 90% of the weight of any plant is non-food, or shall we say only 10 to 15% is food. There's an enormous multiplier available to us to convert those residues back into energy or other forms of energy. And therefore, this nexus is absolutely critical. I think part of any deliberation on water conservation sustainability must include how to get the highest, what we call the crop per drop, which has now become a bit of a slogan, but a cliche. But I think it's a very, very important strategic vector. That's for beginners to, let's say, kick off the conversation from my side.
Okay, thank you so much. May I request Mr. OP Agarwal to discuss the same aspect of water, energy, food nexus, how it can guide in integrated resource planning and decision making. Mr. OP Agarwal, please.
Thanks very much, Sunil. I'm a relative layman in this sector, so let me give you a more layman's answer to this. The way I look at it is nature is all joined up. Nature has a very fine balance with many different resources in nature very closely linked to each other. And what we have tended to do over the years is that we need something badly, we only focus on that. We go in a unidimensional direction without looking at its impact on other things. And an example has been really in the early 1960s, when we suddenly found that we don't have enough food because PL480 was no longer available. We went towards a green revolution. The whole focus was on getting more food. What we didn't realize, that was needed at that time. But what we didn't realize over the years is that it also has an impact on water. It has an impact on the soil. And this recognition is, I think, what should guide us going further. We have to realize that there is a nexus. And unless we think of that whole nexus together, we'll be going in one direction and cause damage everywhere else. So again, as a starter, let me leave it with this.
Okay, we are talking a lot about integrated water resource management, and obviously this concept is going to help us. And this more crop per drop, as mentioned by Mr. Mal, is going to be the eternal slogan from now onwards. Let's talk something about the economy, linkage of economy with this concept. So may I request again Mr. Rohtash Mal to please discuss about the water, energy, food nexus, how it is connected to the economic growth. Mr. Mal, please. You can also, discuss a little bit about pay for use. Mr. Mal, please.
Thank you. I'm going to take off from where OP left off, which is that you need what we might call a holistic systems view of the entire thing. If this entire thing is a pipeline, you can't choke one and hope that the pipeline will work. It's not working. Secondly, one of the key things in terms of economic linkage is any production is linked back to raw material resources, utilization of various facets of whatever the environment provides. Water is unpriced. And if we are looking at an output that is priced, the middle line, i.e. the throughput, has costs associated with it, but there are some inputs that are free, so to speak. If you have free inputs, nobody will care about them. Essentially, in a philosophical sense, you have to have pricing on water for it to be respected as a resource of production. Number two, when you have payment for a certain resource and you try and optimize that, we'll develop models. Now, you pay today, at home we pay per 1,000 liters or per liter or whatever. You drink water per liter. Why don't you grow food with rupees per liter? And the moment you do that, a question box opens up, which says, how do I get disenfranchised users of water the resources, the capability to do that, without them having to take the load of the capital expenditure that is required to reach it to them? And one of the simplest answers comes from the age of the horse carriage. You don't buy a horse carriage to transport, you pay per seat. So pay for use eventually is going to be the manner in which any resource is deployed without the user of that resource carrying the weight of capex and the complexity of managing that capex on his shoulder.
Sir, domestic and industrial water, is priced very well in many parts of our country, but the problem is irrigation water pricing. And we have very few examples. Only state of Maharashtra is having irrigation water pricing. So can you throw some light how we can go ahead with irrigation water pricing?
The same problem exists with power, right?
Yes.
So we have power pricing, diesel pricing, water pricing. Effectively, over the last 70 years, we've had a situation where we haven't even moved towards pricing any of these on a scientific manner so that its deployment, so to speak, is taken care of by the user of that resource. These are matters of policy that require determination. There are political elements to that, as we are seeing today in the farmers' agitation and so on. Because over a period of time, if you don't make these shifts, these become rights which are enshrined by culture and by tradition, and therefore shifting anything becomes a major problem. So now the economics and the politics of the utilization of resources becomes a much larger subject. I'd be delighted to dive into it right away, but your threat of 20 minutes is keeping me from doing that.
Right, you can speak a couple of minutes on this, please.
So let's start. We are in a water. In fact, I've expanded the debate from water to all resources. The fact remains that there has to be a mechanism by way of taxation, which is linked directly to water, that needs to be implemented. It will be tough politically, but it just has to be done. You have to get around that problem. Unless you do that, take a situation of a country like Israel, for example, which is the world's leading think tank and practitioner of water management and water resources. Think about it, complete desert 30, 40 years ago, a complete Greenland today. How did they do this? They did it by pricing the resource. So every farmer, every drop he uses, he pays per kiloliter or whatever it is to get it there. Now, as I said, it's going to be a hot potato or a burning coal, as it were, but you have to get there. And then automatically, once there is commercial respect for that resource, things will start optimizing. That's my take.
Very well said, sir. Pricing is the key, but at the same time, we need lots of political will to implement the pricing, obviously for irrigation water.
We can't have Sunil philosophical discussions about solutions without there being commercial will, political will, legal will, etc. And implementation, all that is what you call society and government.
Excellent, sir. May I request Mr. Agarwal also to throw some light on linkages of WEF Nexus to the economic growth. Mr. Agarwal, please.
Let me very briefly talk, taking things a little further from what Rohtash has been talking about, going into the energy sector, the power sector. You see, not only is water not priced in most parts, but the instrument that we use for drawing groundwater, even that in most states is either free or heavily subsidized. So as far as electricity is concerned, from the agricultural sector, barely 30% of the cost of electricity is recovered from whatever we charge for that. And what this means is that the resource is misused. This is what leads to a lot of mismanagement. And the net result of that, just one number, is Punjab is spending 8,000 crores a year on subsidizing electricity for the agricultural sector. So just this I wanted to project as a light, but then in the larger economic, from an economic growth perspective, food is critical. Food is contributing to our economy. Farmers who constitute a large section, almost 70% of our population, depending on agriculture, their income is contributing to economic growth. And in many countries around the world, particularly China, if you look as an example, the way they have invested in the secondary and tertiary sector is through surpluses in agriculture. So I think getting the water nexus with food and energy is going to help create those surpluses in the agricultural sector, which will be invested into the other sectors and overall lead to economic growth. It can't be agriculture staying where it is and trying to find money from other sources for our economic growth in the manufacturing and services sectors. So I think this nexus has to be kept in mind as we plan for the future to really take our economic growth to a different level.
Sir, we have an entire bouquet of subsidy in agriculture sector, but at the same time we are food self-sufficient. So this is not enough that we are food self-sufficient, even exporting.
You see, what is happening with some of our policies is that at times of need, I'll give you a classic example. At certain times of need, we introduce something which would really be a temporary measure. But then with time, that continues. And I'll give you a classic example. Till about 1990, all coffee, I'm giving the example of coffee because that's what I'm familiar with, tea and coffee. All coffee had to be sold only to the Coffee Board of India. Now, this regulation came in somewhere in the 1940s because they wanted to have coffee available to send to the soldiers fighting the Second World War. But this continued till early 1990s. Now, it's only in the 1990s when we went through this economic liberalization phase that they amended the Coffee Marketing and Control Order to enable coffee to be sold elsewhere as well. So this is something that, subsidies we introduce, a lot of subsidies, yes. But then I think a lot of our policies are very narrowly focused. They focus more vertically than horizontally. And that, future planning, I think we need to do much more of a horizontal assessment than just a vertical assessment.
Absolutely. Sunil, if I may pick up from here in extending an argument, two words I want to respond to. Self-sufficiency, right? I think it's time we let go that as a critical vector of strategy. Self-sufficiency is over and done with, right? Swaraj needed that kind of a push from behind. Take the thing about self-sufficiency of food. First, I have a qualification on that. You may be self-sufficient in terms of carbohydrates. You're severely deficient in terms of proteins, vitamins, and vegetables, horticulture, and all that kind of thing. So are we looking at basic survival, in which case we're more than self-sufficient? If we're looking for wellness as a society, we are a far distance away. The second one, temporary incentives. Absolutely. Every incentive has to have a finite life. Otherwise, you won't have an MSP agitation. If you had taken MSP off from carbohydrates, wheat and rice, and applied them from oilseeds and pulses and other things that we are importing using tens of billions of dollars, sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars. So I think policy that does that is static while the world has shifted is a set of woes that we carry on our shoulders today, and therefore the streets of my city, or rather the boundaries and the roads to my city are blocked today.
Very well said. Very well said.
Excellent interpretation of self-sufficiency. So now we have about 5-6 minutes, and I'd like to hear from both of you what could be the way forward from here, keeping this nexus at the helm. So Mr. Agarwal, please.
I think one problem that we have with governance, not just in India, but I see this across the world, is we have ministries, we have departments which are narrowly focused. I think what we need on this is much more of an area-based approach. It's not that it hasn't been done in the past. We did have this in India. We had the drought-prone areas program. More of an area-based approach where we look at different resources being thought of in an integrated manner. And the way this happens well in government is when we start thinking of multi-ministry missions. Today, the Ministry of Water Resources thinks in one way, Ministry of Agriculture thinks in one way, Ministry of Food thinks in another way, Ministry of Energy thinks in another way. Can we think of a mission approach focusing on an area where multiple ministries contribute their technical skills, but the planning for the area is done in a more horizontally focused manner? That, to my mind, is the way forward.
Okay, mission approach, integrating various ministries which are primarily working in silos. But government has also realized this, and you might be knowing that Ministry of Jal Shakti has been formed by merging two big ministries, erstwhile ministries. Sir, Mr. Mal, your final take on the way forward from here.
It will need a lot of moral fiber and courage on behalf of those who govern to attack the problems really. Now, if you had the moral fiber and the courage that I speak about, you take some brave decisions. Unfortunately, every decision, if it's weighed on one side, this is what you need to do, morally and correctly speaking. On the other side, you're counting your votes, right? You're likely to, depending on your state of mind, you're likely, if you're a statesman, you'll think one way. If you're a politician, you'll think another. So that balance, is it going to come from the mind of a statesman or a politician? Actually is where we are today in India, or indeed anywhere in the world. So I think a lot of final takes and so on, for me, as I'd also describe myself as a layman, as OP did in this. Fact of the matter is, what is your mental clarity to solve the problem? And that, how do you sell your solution to the marketplace, not keeping your own vested interests in front? Perhaps at the back, I understand. But so far, 70 years of governance in India has proved just the opposite. The farmer today is in a state of agitation, because farming is not treated as an industry. It is an industry of votes. And therefore, you throw MSPs, you throw this policy, you throw that policy, 1 kela, 5 rupees, and you keep the guy in check, and the votes come to you. Right? That guy is waking up now. And I think so should the governance of any society such as ours.
Excellent, sir. I think I'm getting reminder to close the session, but I am working with the government, and obviously we need these kind of views from industry and international organization.
Do you really?
Yes, we'd love to invite you. While formulating policies on various issues. It's a great hearing from both of you on this very important subject of water, energy, food nexus. Thanks, Mr. Rohtash Mal, and thanks, Mr. OP Agarwal.
Thank you.
Over to you, all members.